There are places in America where disaster arrives like a siren. A storm tears through overnight. A river rises past its banks. A factory explodes. The event is obvious, sudden, impossible to misunderstand. And then there are places where disaster arrives so slowly that, at first, it barely feels like disaster at all. A crack in a basement wall, a strange smell in the cold air, snow melting in one patch of yard but not another, steam lifting from the ground on a winter morning. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just small inconsistencies, small defects in the illusion that the world beneath your feet is stable. Centralia, Pennsylvania, was one of those places. If you drive through the region today, you will not find what most people imagine when they hear the word town. You will find fragments. Empty roads laid out in a grid that still suggests neighborhoods. Curbs that outline blocks where houses no longer stand. Hillsides reclaimed by trees. Cemeteries. Utility poles. Occasional signs warning visitors not to trespass. The geometry of a community remains, but the community itself has been erased. And below all of it, hidden from view, there is still a fire. Not the kind of fire that roars in the open. Not something you can gather around and feel against your skin. This one moves in darkness, inside old mine workings and coal seams, breathing through cracks in the earth, consuming fuel that was buried long before any of the people who lived here were born. In some places, temperatures have risen to levels no human being could survive. Toxic gases have seeped upward through soil, through foundations, through sinkholes. The ground itself has split, sagged, and, at least once, nearly swallowed a child alive. It began in 1962, and more than 60 years later, it is still burning. This is the story of Centralia, Pennsylvania, the town that was built on coal, undone by coal, and then slowly abandoned while the earth beneath it kept smoldering, day after day, year after year, without pause. To understand Centralia, you have to begin not with the fire, but with the geology. The region sits on one of the richest anthracite coal deposits in the United States. Anthracite is different from the softer, dirtier grades of coal most people picture when they think of smokestacks and soot. It is harder, denser, and cleaner burning. In the 19th century, anthracite was a strategic resource. It heated cities, powered furnaces, fueled railroads, and helped build the industrial backbone of the northeastern United States. Towns across eastern Pennsylvania rose because of it. Mines opened, rail lines followed, and communities appeared in places that otherwise would have remained little more than forested ridges and narrow valleys. Centralia was one of those communities. The borough was established in the mid-19th century, and like many mining towns, its fortunes were tied almost completely to what lay underground. Shafts were sunk, tunnels were carved, coal companies pushed deeper beneath the hills. Around the mines, life accumulated. Homes went up. Churches were built by immigrant communities who had crossed an ocean for work. Small businesses opened along the streets. There were schools, bars, union halls, corner stores, local politics, neighborhood rivalries, and all the ordinary details that make a place feel permanent. At its peak, Centralia had thousands of residents. It was not wealthy in the grand sense, but it was alive. The mines gave people wages, and wages gave them a reason to stay. What the town was building above ground, however, depended on an underground world that was becoming increasingly unstable. Coal mining rarely leaves a landscape untouched. Beneath a town like Centralia, generations of extraction created a hidden maze. Interconnected tunnels, partially collapsed chambers, leftover pillars of coal used to support the roof, ventilation pathways, shafts, breaches, and abandoned works whose exact maps were not always complete or reliable. Even after mining stopped, the mines did not become harmless. They remained as a vast, invisible system beneath homes, streets, churches, and yards. By the middle of the 20th century, the anthracite boom had faded. Oil, gas, and changing industrial patterns weakened demand. Many mines in the region shut down. Centralia was no longer the bustling coal town it had once been, but it was still a functioning borough. Families still lived there. Children still played there. People still expected the future to arrive in the ordinary way, one year at a time. In 1962, Centralia had roughly 1,500 residents. That year, as Memorial Day approached, the borough council faced an unglamorous local problem. The town dump, located in an old strip mine pit near Oddfellows Cemetery, had become a nuisance. It smelled bad. It attracted rats. Families would soon be visiting the cemetery for the holiday, and local officials wanted the area cleaned up. There was a method that had reportedly been used before: burn the trash. It sounds reckless now, but in the context of the time, it was not treated as an extraordinary idea. Small-town waste management in the mid-20th century often operated on improvisation, habit, and what seemed cheap enough to get through the week. The danger, however, was not just the burning garbage. The danger was where the garbage had been placed. The dump occupied an old pit carved into ground shaped by mining, and beneath or around it were abandoned workings that connected to the deeper labyrinth below the town. There were concerns at the time about using such pits for landfill purposes. There were holes and openings that should have been sealed. There were regulatory precautions that, in hindsight, mattered enormously. But on May 27, 1962, members of the local volunteer fire company ignited the landfill. They let it burn. Then they tried to put it out. And for a moment, that might have seemed like the end of it. Except the flames returned. Firefighters came back and doused it again. Then it reappeared. Again, it was knocked down. Again, it returned. The problem was no longer the visible trash fire. Something beneath the landfill had ignited. Somewhere under the pile was an opening, likely concealed by refuse, that provided a route into old mine workings. Once the fire reached the coal, the situation changed completely. A fire in a landfill is a surface emergency. A fire in an underground coal seam is something else entirely. Coal seam fires are among the most stubborn fires on Earth. They can smolder with little oxygen, travel slowly through fractured geology, and follow networks of fuel that stretch for miles. Water is often ineffective. Excavation is expensive and difficult. Toxic gases can build in unseen pockets. Even locating the exact boundaries of the fire can be complicated because the most dangerous parts are hidden behind layers of rock and soil. Centralia had accidentally created the perfect conditions for a long-duration disaster. Abandoned underground mines, exposed coal, air pathways, incomplete sealing, and a fire that had already moved out of reach. By the summer of 1962, officials understood that the fire had entered the mine system. Carbon monoxide began appearing in alarming concentrations. Nearby mines were closed. Engineers and inspectors were called in. Plans were discussed. Responsibility was disputed. Questions emerged almost immediately. Who should pay? How extensive was the fire? Could it still be contained? Had it truly begun with the landfill burn, or had some deeper ignition already existed? In the years that followed, several explanations and arguments would circulate about the exact origin. But by then, the practical question mattered more than the legal one. The fire was underground, and it was moving. Early attempts to stop it followed the logic of containment. Officials considered excavation, trenching, and the injection of water or inert material. At various moments, there were proposals that, if implemented immediately and decisively, might have had a chance. Some engineers believed the fire could still be isolated in its early stage. Others hesitated, whether because of funding, uncertainty, property complications, or the simple bureaucratic tendency to delay difficult action until difficulty becomes catastrophe. This is one of the most unsettling aspects of the Centralia story. It was not a single moment of failure. It was a chain of them. Warnings were present. Information existed. People understood, at least in part, what kind of threat an underground mine fire represented. But no response arrived with enough speed, force, or coordination to match the danger. The town, the companies, and the state were caught in the kind of procedural drift that often defines slow disasters. Each delay made the next decision harder, more expensive, and less likely to succeed. Meanwhile, life on the surface continued. For a long time, Centralia did not look like a place in the process of being destroyed. There was no dramatic evacuation in 1962, no immediate exodus. The fire was largely invisible. That invisibility made it psychologically manageable. Human beings are very good at continuing ordinary life in the presence of distant or abstract danger, especially when the alternative is to accept that home itself may already be compromised. So people stayed. They went to work. They raised children. They attended church. They maintained their houses. The town kept functioning while, below it, combustion spread through coal that had once made the town possible. But the signs accumulated. Residents noticed warm ground in winter. Snow would melt in irregular patterns, exposing grass in places where everything around it remained frozen. Gardens behaved strangely. In some accounts, vegetables ripened early over warmed soil. Steam seeped from fissures. Strange odors drifted from basements. Over time, the invisible disaster began leaving visible fingerprints. Then came the measurements. In 1979, local gas station owner John Coddington reportedly checked the temperature in one of his underground fuel tanks. The gasoline measured around 172 degrees Fahrenheit. That is not the sort of reading one dismisses as a minor anomaly. It suggested that the heat below Centralia was no longer a rumor or an abstraction. It was a force altering the physical environment in ways that could be directly observed. Still, even then, many people remained. Partly because leaving is hard, partly because the danger was uneven, and partly because slow disasters invite doubt. If one block seems normal and another smells like sulfur, what exactly are you supposed to believe? If the state says conditions are dangerous, but your own house has stood for decades and your furnace works and your family sleeps there every night, do you trust the distant experts or your own routine? In Centralia, that tension would define the coming years. The event that forced the story into national consciousness happened in February 1981. A 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was in his grandmother's yard when the ground suddenly opened beneath him. He dropped into a sinkhole that descended toward the burning void below. Accounts describe it as roughly 4 to 5 feet wide at the surface and far deeper beneath, with hot gases rising from inside. He survived because he caught a root and because family members were close enough to pull him out before the earth collapsed further. It is difficult to overstate how terrifying this image is. Not a mine collapse in some distant industrial zone. A backyard. A child. The surface of ordinary domestic life suddenly giving way to an inferno hidden below. Tests reportedly found dangerous concentrations of carbon monoxide and high levels of carbon dioxide in the sinkhole. The story spread across the country. What had long been a local, slow-burning crisis became a national symbol of environmental failure and bureaucratic delay. Now the invisible danger had a photograph, a human face, and a single unforgettable question attached to it. If the ground could open under one child, how many other places in town were no longer safe? By the early 1980s, government agencies had already spent millions trying to extinguish the fire. Excavation efforts, trench projects, slurry injections, and monitoring programs had failed to solve the problem. As the fire spread and the cost of intervention rose, the logic of the situation changed. The question was no longer how to save the town. It was whether the town could be saved at all. In 1983, Congress approved federal funds to relocate residents. Tens of millions of dollars were made available for buyouts. It was, on paper, a pragmatic solution. If the fire could not be stopped economically or reliably, people could be moved out of harm's way. But no bureaucratic language can soften what that meant in human terms. Relocation was not just a safety measure. It was the disassembly of a community. Families had to decide whether to accept money for houses that, in many cases, represented lifetimes of labor and memory. Neighbors who had lived near one another for decades were scattered. Businesses vanished. Churches emptied. Streets lost their purpose. The material structure of the town, homes, storefronts, gathering places, began disappearing one by one. Around 500 buildings were eventually demolished. And in a psychological sense, demolition may have been even more destructive than the fire itself. A buried fire is frightening, but it is also abstract. A bulldozer tearing down your neighbor's house is not abstract. It is proof that the future you assumed no longer exists. Most residents eventually left. Some did not. This is another reason Centralia remains so compelling. It is not only a story about geology and government. It is also a story about attachment. A number of residents resisted relocation for years. Some believed officials exaggerated the danger in certain sections. Some felt the state had mishandled the crisis from the beginning and did not trust its conclusions. Others simply refused to abandon the place where they had been born, married, raised families, and buried relatives. From one perspective, staying looked irrational. From another, leaving looked like surrender to a disaster you did not cause. There were also darker suspicions. Because immense coal reserves still existed beneath the area, some critics argued that state action was motivated by more than public safety. Once the borough was condemned, who ultimately controlled the land and the coal beneath it? Was the evacuation purely humanitarian, or was there also an economic logic that officials preferred not to emphasize? Definitive answers remained elusive, and conspiracy can easily grow in the vacuum left by institutional mistrust. But the suspicion itself tells you something important. Centralia's residents did not experience the crisis as a clean moral drama with obvious heroes. They experienced it as confusion, pressure, relocation notices, legal fights, and the sense that powerful institutions had failed them first and were now trying to manage the consequences on their own terms. In 1992, Pennsylvania invoked eminent domain and condemned the borough. Property rights shifted to the state. Legal battles stretched on for years. In 2002, even Centralia's zip code was revoked, a bureaucratic act that felt almost symbolic in its cruelty. A town can lose its stores, its school, its church, its homes, and then, finally, lose the code that marks it as a place the postal system still recognizes. By the 21st century, Centralia had become something like an American ruin in real time. Not an ancient site preserved by archaeology. A modern town erased within living memory. This transformation changed how outsiders saw it. For some, Centralia became a warning about environmental negligence. For others, it became a curiosity, a destination, a place to photograph cracked pavement and drifting steam. Abandoned stretches of Route 61, damaged by subsidence and heat, took on an almost mythic status. Visitors covered sections of the road with graffiti. Images circulated online. The town's atmosphere invited comparison to post-apocalyptic fiction, most famously Silent Hill. That comparison is understandable, but it also risks flattening the reality. Centralia is not eerie because it resembles horror media. It is eerie because horror media resembles places like Centralia. The unsettling quality comes from seeing ordinary civic space emptied out while the underlying threat remains active. A road is scary when it is cracked and deserted, not just because it looks strange, but because roads are supposed to connect people. In Centralia, the infrastructure remains as evidence of a social order that has already been withdrawn. If you walk through the area today, what stands out is not spectacle so much as absence. The missing houses, the silence, the way entire blocks suggest a population that is no longer there. Cemeteries remain among the most stable landmarks, which feels grimly appropriate. The dead often outlast the institutions of the living, and yet Centralia was never entirely empty. For years, a handful of holdout residents remained, eventually reaching a settlement that allowed them to stay for the rest of their lives. That detail matters. It means Centralia is not only a ghost town preserved behind caution tape. It is also a place where, even after decades of abandonment, Some people still woke up in the morning, made coffee, looked out their windows, and called it home. Imagine what that means psychologically. To live in a town after the town has ended. To drive through streets lined mostly with lots where houses used to stand. To remember which family once lived on which corner. To know that beneath your routines, beneath every season, beneath every snowfall and rainstorm, an old industrial fire still moves through the dark. The fire itself has become a phenomenon studied by engineers, geologists, environmental officials, and historians. Underground coal fires are difficult to model because they behave like a hybrid of combustion system and geological process. Airflow can shift when rock collapses. Heat migrates. Gas composition changes. Surface symptoms do not always reveal subsurface boundaries. Extinguishment is possible in some cases, but success depends on early intervention, access, money, and a willingness to move fast before the fire enters a large or complex network of fuel. Centralia was the opposite of an ideal containment scenario. It had age, depth, abandoned infrastructure, uncertainty, and delay. Once the fire spread far enough, the cost of fully excavating or isolating it became extraordinary. At that point, public policy turned from extinguishment to monitoring and exclusion. In other words, the fire was not defeated. It was managed by sacrificing the town above it. That may be the bleakest sentence in the entire story. The fire was not defeated. The town was surrendered. Official estimates have varied over the years, but the long-term outlook has remained grim. The fire has often been projected to continue for at least another 100 years and perhaps well over 200. For the fire's purposes, the coal underground is abundant enough that human timescales become almost irrelevant. Administrations change. Residents die. Roads decay. Trees return. The fire persists. This persistence gives Centralia its unusual emotional power. Many disasters end, even when their consequences do not. Floodwater recedes. Smoke clears. Rubble is removed. A date can be attached to the event. There is a before and an after. Centralia has no clear after. There is only a continuing condition, a place that entered disaster and never quite came out. That is why the town feels less like a conventional tragedy and more like a wound that was never allowed to close. Every image associated with Centralia, steam from fissures, leaning road surfaces, empty lots, warning signs, carries the same implication. This is still happening. Even the mythology surrounding Centralia reflects that discomfort. People are drawn to it because it seems to violate the expected boundaries between civilization and geology. Towns are supposed to rest on land. In Centralia, the land itself became the hostile force. Not dramatically, not all at once, but persistently enough to outlast most of the people who once lived above it. There is also a deeper lesson here about modern systems and the illusions they create. Industrial society teaches us to think of the built environment as stable. Roads, pipes, electrical lines, foundations, zoning maps, mortgage documents, all of these things imply order. They suggest that land has been understood, classified, and made usable. But in mining regions especially, the surface can be deceptive. What appears settled may depend on voids, supports, abandoned workings, and buried hazards left by earlier generations. Centralia is what happens when that hidden inheritance reasserts itself. The town's destruction was not purely natural and not purely accidental. It was produced by geology interacting with industry, regulation, neglect, cost-cutting, uncertainty, and time. That makes it especially modern. Centralia was not destroyed by a volcano or an earthquake. It was destroyed by a system human beings built, stopped maintaining, and then misunderstood until it was too late. And still, perhaps the most haunting part of the story is not the policy failure or the combustion science. It is the image of ordinary life continuing as long as it could. Parents making dinner while carbon monoxide readings rose somewhere nearby. Children walking to school over abandoned mines. Winter mornings with steam drifting from the hillside like breath from an invisible machine. Town meetings, buyout arguments, demolition notices, birthdays, funerals, snowfall over warm ground. The end of Centralia was not a single event because the end of a town rarely is. A town dies in stages, first economically, then physically, then socially, then administratively, and finally, in memory. Centralia has reached each of those stages at different times for different people. For former residents, the place may still exist vividly in recollection. The main street, the houses, the voices, the names attached to each block. For younger visitors, it exists mostly as an atmosphere, a cautionary landmark, a place where an impossible sentence happens to be true. The town is on fire. And that sentence remains true. Right now, beneath forest growth and abandoned alignments and the remnants of a borough that once expected to endure, combustion continues in darkness. Coal laid down millions of years ago is still reacting with oxygen in passageways shaped by human extraction. Heat is still moving through rock. Gas is still forming. The process is slower than drama, slower than news, slower even than memory. But it continues. There is something almost mythic about that. A fire too deep to confront directly, too vast to smother easily, too patient to exhaust itself within a human lifetime. Yet Centralia is not myth. It is evidence. Evidence that landscapes remember what we do to them. Evidence that neglect compounds. Evidence that a small decision made for convenience can become, under the wrong conditions, an inheritance of ruin. If you strip away the strange visuals and the ghost town mystique, Centralia finally comes down to one horrifying fact. People built their lives over a fuel source. The fuel source caught fire, and the fire proved more permanent than the town. That is why Centralia lingers in the imagination. Not because it is the biggest disaster, or the deadliest, or the most visually spectacular, but because it feels so intimate. A neighborhood, a backyard, a road, a churchyard, a place where people expected continuity. Then the ground changed its mind. More than 60 years have passed since that Memorial Day season in 1962, when a dump fire was set and, by most accounts, failed to die on the surface before finding its way underground. Since then, generations have come and gone. Residents have left. Houses have fallen. Legal settlements have been signed. Visitors have arrived to witness what remains. Through all of it, the fire has kept its own schedule. And somewhere beneath Centralia tonight, in old workings cut into anthracite, out of sight and almost out of comprehension, the coal is still burning. Tomorrow it will still be burning. And for years after that, perhaps for centuries, long after the last witness is gone and the last memory has thinned into local history, the fire may go on doing what it has done every day since 1962, consuming the town from below, slowly, silently, without ever needing to be seen.